A wealthy father notices a black waitress and allows his disabled son to take the lead in a dance moment, ultimately transforming her life forever. Silence enveloped Kingsley's, Manhattan's most prestigious dining establishment. So heavy, it felt almost tangible. Conversations halted, cutlery paused mid-motion, and countless eyes fixed on the small space separating the tables. 10-year-old Lucas Morgan was visibly trembling, his legs confined in metal braces, wavering as he reached toward Diana Jackson, the restaurant's sole black waitress. The live piano had just started a gentle tune, and the boy's sudden urge to ask someone to dance emerged unexpectedly. "Sir, please control your son." Manager Thompson's sharp voice pierced the quiet. "This is not a dance hall, and our staff are not here to entertain children." Richard Morgan, head of Morgan Investments, and among the nation's wealthiest, swallowed hard. It was the first occasion he had brought Lucas to dinner publicly since the accident that had partially paralyzed the boy's legs 2 years before, a decision he vowed never to repeat. "Lucas, sit down," came the low but firm command. Diana remained still, her eyes shifting between the manager, the billionaire, and the boy whose hands still hovered uncertainly in the air. During her 5 years working here, she had mastered invisibility, especially to patrons like Morgan. "Mr. Thompson, I am leaving now, my shift is over," her voice steady, as she took off her apron and laid it carefully on the tray before walking away. To everyone's surprise, she smiled at Lucas Morgan and took his hand. "I cannot dance in an apron," Richard Morgan exclaimed, standing up suddenly. "What do you think you are doing?" Diana Jackson held his gaze firmly. "I am accepting an invitation, sir." Before anyone could intervene, Lucas took a hesitant step forward. His foot dragged painfully across the floor, the metal of his braces scraping loudly. Yet Diana did not hurry him or try to guide his movements. She simply matched her pace to his. "She is going to be fired tomorrow," whispered a woman at the table nearby. Richard watched, frozen, as a sudden memory came to him. Elizabeth, his late wife, dancing with Lucas in the living room. "It is not about perfection," she had said. "It is about connection." As Diana followed Lucas's awkward steps, something shifted in the boy's eyes. Fear was replaced by careful focus. Shame turned into shy pride. For the first time since the accident, he was neither being led nor corrected but taking the lead himself. "Mr. Morgan," the manager's voice cut through his thoughts, "I assure you this will not happen again. She will be disciplined properly." Richard remained silent. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. After all, a man of his influence could end someone's career with one word. Employees paused their tasks. Other guests watched in morbid fascination. Yet the only sound that stayed with Richard was Lucas's smile. Diana brought the boy back to the table after only 3 dance steps. "Thank you for," she said formally, as though addressing a grown-up. "Asking me out was an honor." When she turned to leave, Richard halted her with a different tone in his voice, almost unfamiliar to himself. "What is your full name, Diana Jackson?" Sir Richard inquired. He nodded slowly and repeated, "Diana Jackson," as if committing it to memory. Then he retrieved a card from inside his jacket and extended it toward her. "My office tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning." The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Diana took the card without revealing any feelings, but her hand shook just a little. "Dad?" Lucas called out as she walked away. "Why did you do that?" The question lingered like an accusation. Richard watched his son and momentarily saw more than the child Elizabeth had left in his care. He saw a whole person whose desires and needs he had neglected for 2 years. As the dinner continued in uneasy silence, nobody noticed Diana's glance before she left. Not out of fear or defeat, but with quiet determination that stood in stark contrast to the storm brewing in Richard Morgan's eyes. If this tale of dignity and change is already moving you, remember to subscribe to the channel to see how a simple act of respect can ignite a silent revolution that has the power to change lives forever. The lobby of Morgan Tower gleamed with its glass and marble walls reflecting the morning sun. Diana Jackson instantly felt out of place in her finest clothes, a navy blue skirt, and she wore a white blouse purchased during a sale. The passers-by around her seemed dressed in garments likely costing more than what she paid for a whole month's rent. "Diana Jackson to see Mr. Morgan," she told the receptionist, who scrutinized her with a detached stare before making a call. "18th floor. Miss Turner will see you." Inside the elevator, Diana inhaled deeply, clutching her worn-out purse tightly against her chest. It was not fear she experienced, but rather a silent resolve that stemmed from enduring far worse challenges before. Miss Turner was a woman in her 40s with a keen eye and flawless posture. "Mr. Morgan is on a conference call. Please follow me," she said. As Diana walked through the corridors lined with mirrors, she sensed the employees' curiosity. A black woman being guided through the executive offices was a rarity enough to stir whispers. Suddenly, Turner asked while they waited alone, "He had you fired, didn't he? It happens when powerful clients make calls, and people like you lose their jobs. People like me, too. You know what I mean." Turner adjusted her glasses. "Employees who don't know their place." Diana smiled, unimpressed, and wondered where exactly that place was. Before Turner could reply, her phone rang. "He will see you now." Richard Morgan's office spanned half the floor. Through the vast windows stretching from floor to ceiling, Manhattan appeared like a distant amusement park. The man stood looking out over the city as if it were his private domain. "Mr. Morgan?" Diana addressed him formally. Richard turned his face around. The mask of practiced control remained intact. "Miss Jackson, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing toward a chair. "Please, have a seat." The silence that followed was a deliberate strategy Diana immediately recognized. It was the kind of quiet meant to unsettle someone, to make them reveal too much and incriminate themselves. "Do you have a background?" Richard finally asked. "Excuse me? Education? College?" Diana maintained her steady gaze. "I have a bachelor's degree in child development from NYU and an unfinished master's in special education." A flicker of surprise, perhaps, passed over Richard's face. "And do you work as the waitress?" "I actually juggle 3 jobs: the restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring whenever I find students." Richard moved closer to her table, picking up a folder. "I did some digging on you, Miss Jackson. I wanted to know who the person was that," he hesitated, "danced with my son." He opened the folder, revealing printed photos of a community center called Freedom Steps, which she had founded 6 years ago. Diana straightened in her chair. "I co-founded it with my sister Zoe. It's a dance program for children with physical disabilities." Richard flipped through some documents. "Which is about to shut down due to funding shortages." Diana showed no sign of surprise. Naturally, he would learn all this in less than 24 hours. "I didn't come here to ask you for money, Mr. Morgan." "Then why are you here?" "Because you invited me." Richard laughed quietly, a sound without joy. "Fair enough." He stood again, restless. "I want you to work for me." Diana blinked, genuinely surprised by the hardened expression on Richard Morgan's face as he sat across from her like a concerned father. The name of his son, Lucas, seemed difficult for him to say aloud. Diana noticed how his eyes briefly lingered on a photograph resting on the table, a smiling woman holding a baby. Richard continued, "I have the finest specialists in the country," mentioning physical therapists, neurologists, and psychologists. Yet he hesitated, as if the truth escaped him, and finally admitted, "What you did yesterday, it was just a dance, Mr. Morgan. It was the first time I have seen my son smile since the accident." The confession was painful. I do not want a dancer for my son. I want someone who can follow, not lead," he added. Diana carefully scrutinized the man before her. Beneath his surface of control and authority, she saw something others might miss: a desperate, lost father. "I can pay you 5 times your current salary," Richard offered. Diana rose to her feet. Richard looked stunned, unaccustomed to hearing refusal. "I do not work for those who judge me based on my race or social class before valuing my skills," she explained calmly. "And I definitely do not work for those who try to buy solutions for emotional pain." Richard's face reddened. "You are turning down an offer that would solve your financial problems," he said. "Out of pride," Diana corrected. "Out of dignity. And because your son deserves more than someone hired merely to pretend they care." She moved toward the exit but paused, adding, "Lucas does not need more experts. He needs the freedom to take charge of his own life. You do not." "I understand my son, no," Diana agreed, "but I am certain. There are people like him, individuals whose physical constraints are insignificant compared to the unseen prisons we create for them." She pulled a card from her handbag and placed it on the table. "Freedom Steps classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. If you want to bring Lucas, the initial session is complimentary." As Diana walked away, she passed Miss Turner, who had clearly been eavesdropping behind the door. "You just declined a proposal from Richard Morgan," she whispered with disbelief. "Are you out of your mind?" Diana grinned. "Perhaps, but I would rather be mad than enslaved." On the next Wednesday, Diana stood at the front desk of the community center when Zoe, her sister and fellow project founder, hurried up. "There is a Bentley parked outside," she said quietly, nervously fixing her hijab, "and you will not believe who is inside." Looking through the glass, Diana spotted the elegant vehicle. Lucas was seated in the back, gazing nervously out the window. Richard remained behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel as though wrestling with some inner turmoil. "He will not enter," Zoe predicted. "Men like him never visit places like this." Diana smiled, recalling Lucas's look during those fleeting times of dancing. Do not underestimate the strength of a resolute son. They observed as the car door opened. Lucas stepped out, carefully adjusting his devices. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Richard emerged as well. The billionaire appeared out of place in his informal trousers. Wearing a sweater and an outfit that was clearly meant to appear less formal, but still displayed privilege loudly, Diana Jackson whispered to herself, "I told you he would come." Zoe gazed at her, asking silently, "What did you do?" Diana did not respond, but her eyes gleamed with a secret not even her sister fully understood. In her small apartment in the Bronx, concealed beneath her bed, lay a notebook filled with detailed notes about children like Lucas Morgan and men like Richard Morgan. Years of careful observation, research, and a plan had begun simply by accepting an invitation to dance. What Richard Morgan could neither comprehend nor foresee in his world of towering glass buildings and endless wealth was that Diana Jackson was not just a waitress who agreed to dance with his son. She was a determined woman with a purpose, and the empire built on isolation and privilege was about to confront its greatest test: the undeniable truth that some of life's most valuable lessons cannot be purchased. They must be experienced. Freedom Steps operated out of an old community warehouse where hand-painted posters covered the walls with messages like, "Your rhythm, your rules," and "Every move counts." When Richard and Lucas entered, children using various mobility devices moved freely to the rhythm of a gentle beat. Mr. Morgan and Diana approached, Diana dressed simply with the program's logo visible. Lucas watched in wonder as a girl in a wheelchair spun in smooth, perfect circles, while a boy with a prosthetic leg crafted a graceful dance of his own. Richard appeared visibly uneasy as he observed the sequence of steps and remarked, "It seems disorderly." Diana responded calmly, "There is organization, It simply differs from the one you recognize. She then turned to Lucas Morgan and asked, "Would you like to participate?" The boy nodded eagerly but cast a hesitant glance at his father. "Go ahead," Richard replied tensely. "I will be right here." While Diana guided Lucas to join the group, Zoe approached Richard and offered him a chair. "The first day always proves most difficult," she noted. "Not for the children, but for the parents." "This is not therapy," Richard insisted. "I hired the top rehabilitation specialists." Zoe inquired gently, "And how has that worked out for Lucas?" At that moment, the studio door opened and an older woman entered, leaning on an elaborate cane. Her steel-gray hair was styled in intricate braids, and she carried an air of authority. Zoe whispered her name, Dr. Elaine Mercer, a neuroscientist who focuses on brain plasticity and retired from Harvard. The woman greeted a few children before turning to Richard. "Mr. Morgan, you have declined my research proposals 3 times over the past 2 years." "Dr. Mercer, I did not expect to find you here," Richard said. She explained, "I manage the research program. We are investigating how non-directive movement approaches influence neural reorganization in children facing motor difficulties." Richard frowned and remarked, "I believed this was simply a community dance class." Diana returned as Lucas explored movements with another child. Freedom Steps is an experimental motor rehabilitation initiative based on the concept of movement autonomy, she explained. The explanation was that we incorporate adaptive dance alongside neuroscientific concepts. "Why do you work as a waitress while leading a research program?" "Because we lack sufficient funding at the moment, and because people like you have rejected us on 3 occasions." Suddenly, it clicked. You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on the proposals, the co-author. Dr. Mercer corrected Diana, mentioning she has an incomplete master's degree since she needed to leave university to care for her sister. But her theoretical contributions are groundbreaking. "You recognized me at the restaurant," Richard stated once you arrived. Diana confirmed this, and when Lucas stood up to dance, I saw a chance to demonstrate rather than explain. Was the dance scripted? Absolutely not. Lucas chose to rise, and I decided to follow. A group of reporters entered the studio, and Richard immediately stiffened. "What is this?" "Part 2 of the plan," Diana responded with a faint smile. Zoe then showed Richard a recently published article titled "Revolutionary Motor Rehabilitation Methodology Shows Promising Results." Dr. Mercer elaborated, "Today we released our initial findings and we invited the media." "You involved my son in a public relations move." Richard's voice was sharp as ice. Diana guided him to a side room where photographs of numerous children covered the walls, each marked with handwritten notes on their progress. On the final wall, there was an empty frame. "What is that?" he inquired. "Our future," Diana replied, "the complete rehabilitation center we could establish with enough resources. 500 children per year instead of 50. "All of this was carefully planned," muttered Richard. "The dance, the meeting, everything that led me here." On the day of the press event, I spotted a chance and seized it. 4 months ago, when you canceled our meeting without even glancing at the proposal, I vowed to find another way. Diana. Zoe interrupted. "It's Lucas." They hurried back. Lucas stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by other children. Someone had stopped the music and silence fell over the crowd. The boy had removed one of his braces and was attempting to stand, using just one support. "Lucas?" Richard began to move forward, but Diana held him back. "Wait," she whispered. "Watch." Lucas inhaled deeply and focused. Then, to the astonishment of everyone, especially his father, he took a full step without complete support. It was small and shaky, but completely his own. The children cheered. Camera flashes erupted. Richard's face, usually calm and unreadable, now shimmered with unshed tears. "That is why we created Freedom Steps," Diana said quietly. "It is not about perfect steps, but taking your first steps independently. Richard watched his son not as a challenge to control, but as a whole person discovering his own power. "This could have been done without manipulating me," he said at last. "It could have been if you had returned our calls or read our proposals." 3 times reporters turned toward Richard, a murmur growing as Lucas, unaware of the tension, kept practicing his new step with pure focus. Richard Morgan was watching. Lucas Morgan faced a dilemma with only 2 paths ahead of him. He could either retreat angrily, confirming the media's view of him as cold and calculating, or he could seize the opportunity his son had created. A rare moment bridging the authority he constantly exercised and the freedom his son sought. Richard found himself in unfamiliar territory, where neither his wealth nor his power dictated the next move. The man who once controlled every detail of his world now encountered a decision beyond the reach of money. His glance shifted from the radiant smile on his son's face to the reporters eagerly awaiting his response. Humility had never been part of his language, but seeing the change flicker in Lucas's expression, something within Richard started to unravel. The familiar symphony of dominance and privilege shifted into a new rhythm, forcing him to choose whether to keep conducting or to learn the art of following. Richard Morgan confronted the reporters who had gathered to gauge his reaction. His son had just asserted independence right before their eyes, and Diana Jackson had skillfully brought him to this inevitable moment. One reporter stepped forward, inquiring, "Could you share your thoughts on your presence at Freedom Steps today? Is it true that your foundation declined to support this initiative on 3 occasions?" Richard cast a quick glance at Lucas, who was still absorbed in rehearsing his new step, unaware of the political undercurrents. Then, much to everyone's surprise, especially Diana's, he gave a smile and replied, "Do you know what is the hardest part for a man in my shoes?" He addressed the reporter while speaking openly, breaking the expected stoic facade. Spoken loud enough for all to catch every word, admitting, "When we make mistakes," a heavy silence took over the room. The Morgan Foundation is excited to reveal a pledge to completely finance Freedom Steps for the next 5 years, along with constructing a permanent rehabilitation facility based on the approach created by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Jackson. Camera flashes burst rapidly, as Zoe gasped in surprise. One condition he mentioned while watching Diana stiffen was that Ms. Jackson must keep full control over the program and its methods without any corporate meddling. 3 months afterward, heavy machinery was flattening the site for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. Although not the most extravagant project the Morgan Foundation had ever backed, it stood as the most groundbreaking initiative. Each area was planned with direct contributions from the children and their relatives. Diana often oversaw construction, but always accompanied, while Lucas appeared regularly, sometimes accompanied by other children, and much to the staff's ongoing astonishment, Richard Morgan also arrived, silently observing the development. "I never imagined you would actually attend board meetings," Diana remarked one afternoon as they examined plans. "I never thought I would have to learn about neuroplasticity at 50, Richard responded, rubbing his weary eyes. A scientific paper covered in post-it notes lay before him. Yet here they were. Diana studied him intently, asking if this was part of his public atonement or if he genuinely cared. Lucas Morgan requested to have his second brace removed last week. I am aware he mentioned that his former physical therapist insisted this would be impossible for at least 2 years. Diana Jackson smiled, but reminded me, "You dismissed her, remember? Because you said she was mistaken." And indeed she was. Diana gestured toward a photograph of Lucas balancing with only one crutch. "He is advancing faster than any conventional medical forecast predicted." Suddenly Richard Morgan asked, "Why have you never accepted my apology?" Because he had never actually apologized. Instead, he shifted resources, altered policies, and funded their program. That does not count as an apology. It is just compensation, he acknowledged with a slow nod. Fair enough. 6 months later, at the opening ceremony, the contrast with that evening at the restaurant was striking. The expansive, accessible space was bustling with children using different mobility aids, all moving effortlessly. In the center of the main hall, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small group performance with 3 other children. Though his movements were still somewhat restricted, they were executed with a confidence no medical expert had anticipated. Richard watched quietly from afar, without intervening. "He no longer needs you to guide him," Diana said softly as she approached. Richard agreed but added, "Yet he still requires my presence. That is the critical difference." Turning to face her, he simply said, "Thank you." "For what exactly?" Diana inquired. "For teaching me to follow," he replied. A reporter came forward and asked Mr. Morgan, "How does it feel to witness your son's progress?" Richard looked at Lucas, who now, supporting a younger girl in finding her footing, he felt pride not for what he had personally conquered, but for what he had built to benefit others. The greatest lesson learned on this journey, according to Richard Morgan, a man once famous solely for his financial empire, was shared directly with the camera. He explained that genuine leaders are not just those who direct others along the paths they believe are correct, but those brave enough to follow when shown a better route. 1 year later, the Freedom Steps initiative had grown to include 3 additional cities. Diana Jackson was honored with the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her approach started being adopted in hospitals nationwide. Lucas Morgan, now relying only on a light cane during challenging days, was enrolled in a mainstream school and became a youth ambassador for the program, encouraging other children to discover their own tempo. Richard came to understand the most difficult and important lesson: that real strength does not come from controlling every action, but from recognizing when to step aside and allow others to lead. In a society where powerful individuals seldom alter their views, and those without influence often remain unseen, the tale of Richard, Diana, and Lucas shows us that true change happens when invisible walls between us are crossed. When a billionaire learns from a waitress and a father follows the path of his son, it is a testament to how a simple act of respect can transform everything. True impact remains eternal within your soul. Rest assured. Make sure to subscribe to our channel because we hold the conviction that the deepest transformations do not arise from monumental declarations or vast fortunes. They begin when a person finds the bravery to take a genuine initial move, and another individual possesses the insight to recognize it.